You ever learn something about a friend so wild, so quietly unsettling, that you can't help but replay every memory you have of them, looking for clues you might have missed? It's like being handed a puzzle you didn't know existed, and suddenly realizing you've been holding a handful of broken, mismatched pieces all along. This isn't some distant drama from a tabloid headline, it's about someone I see almost every day. Someone whose secrets came tumbling out like coins from a ripped pocket, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. I remember that night, last Friday, the kind where the city feels restless, all neon reflections and late-night bus engines. I was sprawled across my sofa, half listening to some true crime podcast and waiting for my dinner to finish microwaving, when my phone lit up. 3 missed calls from Amber. My stomach twisted. Amber doesn't call unless it's important, or unless something's happened. I hesitated, thumb hovering over her name, the familiar churn of anxiety crawling up my chest. Because I knew, deep down, this would be one of those nights that changes how you see a person forever. When I finally called her back, she was crying. You know, the kind of crying where the words come out in bursts, like someone shoveling dirt from a grave? It wasn't even about her boyfriend, not directly. She was at that little bus stop near the river, the one with the broken bench and the graffiti that never quite fades. I could hear the traffic in the background, the distant laughter of people who had no idea someone was quietly coming undone only meters away. Amber told me everything. Not just the story from the night before, but all of it. About the guys, the guilt, the way she always feels like she's watching her own life from the outside, powerless to stop herself. She kept saying she didn't know why. That's what really stuck with me. Not the things she'd done, but her blank confusion about it, like someone looking at blood on their hands and insisting they can't remember where the wound came from. I went to meet her, walking fast even though it was midnight and the city was shivering itself to sleep. The moon was out, but hidden behind low, oily clouds, and every step toward that bus stop felt heavier. There's something about the cold, empty roads at night. They make you notice every sound, every shadow, as if something is about to emerge from the darkness just for you. Amber looked small sitting there, knees pulled to her chest, makeup smeared under her eyes. For a moment, she reminded me of a lost kid on the playground, unsure whether to keep crying or just wait for her mom to show up and tell her it's all going to be okay. Only nobody was coming. We sat in silence. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her jacket, biting at her thumbnail, and finally told me about the night at the festival. How she met some guy after her shift, how she'd sworn to herself she was just being friendly, how quickly it all spiraled. She told me she wishes she could see the warning signs, the moments when everything tips from normal to not normal, but she never does. It's always in the rearview mirror, too late to change anything. There was this strange energy in the air. Like something fragile had cracked open between us. I kept thinking about Amber's boyfriend, how he probably thought she was safe at work, maybe even picturing her pouring drinks and laughing with colleagues, never knowing she was living a double life. It made my skin crawl, but not for the reason you might think. Not because of anger, but because of how easy it is for someone to keep a whole world of secrets just out of sight. Amber asked me, point blank, why I thought she kept doing it. I hesitated. How do you tell your friend you think she's looking for something she never got as a kid? That every time she steps over the line, it's less about thrill and more about filling a hole that never healed? I couldn't bring myself to say it, but the thought sat there between us, heavy as a confession. Her dad was never in the picture. I've always known that, but now it felt like the missing piece, the echo in her voice when she talks about feeling alone, the way she clings to any scrap of attention, no matter where it comes from. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm projecting. But it's hard not to see a pattern when you're this close to the chaos. We left the bus stop after an hour, neither of us sure what would come next. The city was quiet, but my mind was screaming with questions. How well do we ever really know our friends? And what do you do when someone's darkness starts to spill into your life, too? The next morning, everything felt changed. My phone buzzed with Amber's messages, apologies, promises to do better, to try and talk to someone, to figure herself out. But even as I read them, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over. The sense that something invisible and dangerous was working its way through the cracks in her life, and maybe, just maybe, mine too. I kept rereading Amber's messages, thumbs scrolling back and forth, searching for something that would make sense of it all, a thread I could tug that would unravel the knot in my chest. Outside, the sky was that washed-out morning gray, the kind that makes everything look flatter, duller. Even the birds sounded uncertain, their songs lost in the traffic noise. For the rest of that day, I drifted through my routine like a ghost. Work emails, lunch, a half-hearted shower, each task done on autopilot, my mind circling back to the conversation at the bus stop. I couldn't shake the images, Amber's hunched shoulders, the way her voice broke, the hollow look in her eyes as if she was miles away from me, from everyone. By late afternoon, Amber called again. She sounded steadier, almost too steady, like someone rehearsing a role. She wanted to meet up at her place, just talk, she said, nothing heavy. I agreed, grabbing my jacket and keys, feeling a jitter of anxiety I tried to ignore. Amber's apartment always felt like it was caught halfway between moving in and moving out. Unframed photos leaned against the wall, a pile of laundry threatened to spill from the bathroom. I noticed her boyfriend's shoes by the door, lined up neatly, almost accusingly. We flopped onto the worn sofa, both of us picking at the silence, neither quite ready to start. She put on music, something low, instrumental, barely there. The room smelled faintly of coconut shampoo and the cheap vanilla candles she bought in bulk. Amber looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for something. I realized she was waiting for judgment, for me to tell her she was horrible, or broken, or worse. Instead, I just asked her how she was feeling, really feeling, now that the confessions were out in the open. She laughed, a brittle sound, and said she felt like she was floating above her own life, watching it all go wrong in slow motion. It's like I'm always running towards something, she said, her fingers twisting a loose thread in her blanket, and I never know what it is until it's gone. Then I just feel empty again. The sunlight coming in through her kitchen window made patterns on the carpet. Amber watched them as she spoke, her words starting to spill out faster. She told me about growing up in a house where silence was normal, where her mother would disappear into her room for hours, where the only photographs of her father were blurry, outdated Polaroids stuffed in a shoebox. She remembered asking, once, why he never called. Her mother just shrugged, eyes fixed on the TV, as if that question was a pebble thrown into a bottomless well. I listened, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness, but mostly helplessness. What was I supposed to say? That it wasn't her fault? That she deserved better? The truth was, I didn't know what anyone deserved anymore. Amber's boyfriend still had no idea, still believed in a version of her that had never really existed. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her camera roll, and showed me a photo she'd taken the night of the festival. It was a blurry shot of fairy lights strung between trees, the colors bleeding into the darkness. I wanted to remember it, she said quietly, but I barely do. Everything after work is a blur. She didn't need to say what she meant. I could see it in her face. Later, as the light faded and the room slipped into shadow, Amber made coffee. We sat at her tiny kitchen table, cups steaming between us, the air thick with everything unspoken. She asked me if I thought people could change, really change, or if they were always haunted by the same mistakes, doomed to repeat them. I wanted to believe people could change. I told her that. But even as I said it, I felt the doubt pressing in. Sometimes it seemed like we were all just spinning in circles, haunted by the ghosts of people we used to be. It was nearly midnight by the time I left. As I stepped into the hall, Amber hugged me, too tightly, as if she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against my shoulder. I wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but all I managed was, "It's okay. I'm here." But walking home under the streetlights, the words echoed in my head, hollow and strange. I'm here. For now, at least. But for how long? The streets were empty, except for the occasional flicker of a TV behind someone's curtains or the low rumble of a night bus passing by. I kept my hands stuffed in my pockets, eyes on the pavement, mind tumbling through everything Amber had told me. I wondered, not for the first time, if I was getting too close, if her troubles were starting to seep into my own life, soaking through the seams. At home, the apartment felt colder than usual. I sat at the kitchen table in the half-light, sipping a glass of water and staring at the silent glow of my phone. Amber's name was still at the top of my messages, little dots dancing and vanishing as she typed and erased whatever she wanted to say next. The stillness was so loud, I almost missed the faint sound of my neighbor's footsteps above me. Sometimes, late at night, the world feels too big and too small all at once. That night, sleep came in fits, thin, restless layers of dream and waking, as if my mind was trying to make sense of a story with too many missing pages. I kept seeing Amber's face, pale in the glow of streetlights, her voice playing in my head, "I just feel empty again." It clung to me like a chill I couldn't shake. The next day, I tried to throw myself back into normal life. But the normal felt wrong, hollowed out, as if the walls themselves knew a secret they wouldn't share. Even my coworkers seemed distant, their laughter brittle, every conversation reduced to surface-level jokes and weather complaints. I caught myself scanning the room, looking for someone who might understand, but everyone was wrapped in their own quiet struggles, none quite as visible as Amber's. Later, during lunch, I scrolled through old photos on my phone, group shots at parties, birthday dinners, blurry selfies from nights out. Amber was in almost all of them, grinning or pulling faces, always at the center of the crowd. I remembered how she was the life of every party, the first to dance, the last to go home. I tried to see her the way everyone else did, funny, wild, a little unpredictable, but now all I could see was the strain behind her smile, the way her eyes sometimes flickered toward the door as if she was already planning her escape. By the time work ended, I'd talked myself into visiting Amber again. Maybe it was worry, or maybe it was the fear that if I didn't check in, something worse would happen and I'd never forgive myself. She answered the door in sweatpants, her hair piled messily on her head, the TV humming in the background. The apartment smelled of reheated noodles and the faint tang of nail polish remover. We talked about nothing for a while, TV shows, mutual friends, the disaster that was her attempt at baking last week. But beneath the chatter was a current of unease, a tension that wouldn't settle. She was quieter than usual, her laughter sharp and brief, her gaze slipping away whenever I looked at her too long. Eventually, the conversation circled back to her boyfriend, how she felt trapped, guilty, but also resentful. "He deserves someone better," she murmured, tracing circles on her mug, "but he'd never believe me if I told him everything. He thinks I'm his home." Something in that hit me like a punch. I thought about the weight of secrets, how they shape the way you walk, the way you love. I wanted to ask her what she was searching for, what made her say yes when she wanted to say no, but the words tangled in my throat. Maybe I was afraid of what she'd say, or of what she wouldn't. The room grew quiet, the only sound the muffled thud of footsteps from the apartment above. Amber's phone buzzed, her boyfriend, probably, checking in, making sure she was okay. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then silenced it, setting it face down on the table. "Do you ever feel like you're just pretending?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like, everything you say, every choice you make, it's just an act, and one day, everyone's going to see through it?" I nodded, unsure what else to do. The truth was, I did feel that way, more often than I'd admit. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk away from Amber's chaos. Maybe I saw pieces of myself in her, pieces I didn't want to examine too closely. We sat there for a long time, the day slipping into evening, the shadows creeping across the floor. I knew we couldn't stay like this forever, teetering between truth and silence, but for now, it was enough just to be there, sharing the quiet, feeling the shape of our secrets pressing in from all sides. A week went by. Amber and I slipped into this strange rhythm, late-night texts, occasional phone calls, afternoons spent wandering aimlessly through parks or sitting at cramped coffee shop tables, watching the world churn around us. We never talked directly about the festival night again, but everything that happened seemed to hover just above our conversations, a dark cloud casting its own weird, shifting shadow. One evening, I met her after work at this little cafe by the canal, the kind with mismatched chairs and string lights draped across dusty window panes. The air outside was heavy, humid, thunderstorm weather, the kind that makes your skin itch with anticipation. I found Amber already there, staring into a chipped mug of tea, her expression unreadable. She looked tired. Not just physically, but as if she was carrying the weight of something that would never quite let her rest. We talked, sort of. She asked about my family, my work, what I'd been watching on Netflix, and I answered in half-truths, neither of us really listening. Sometimes a couple would laugh loudly at the next table, and Amber would flinch, her gaze darting to the window as if she wanted to bolt. I started to realize how much she hated sitting still, being present, how every moment of stillness felt like a trap to her. The storm finally broke, sheets of rain hammering the glass, making the world outside look blurred and strange. I watched the water racing down the street, felt the electricity in the air, and I wondered how many other people were sitting across from a friend, desperate to say something that might change everything, but too scared to start. Amber leaned in, lowering her voice so only I could hear. I feel like I'm watching my life through someone else's eyes, she said, the words spilling out, raw and fast. Like I'm acting out a part and I can't ever stop. I do these things, and I don't even recognize myself. Then afterwards, I feel sick, like there's something rotting inside me. I felt a surge of panic. What do you say to that? How do you help someone who doesn't even feel real to themselves? I just reached out, squeezed her hand, and told her I was there for her. It felt woefully inadequate, but what else did I have to offer? My presence, my silence, my willingness to bear witness to her mess. The rain kept pouring. The lights flickered. I wondered if her boyfriend was trying to reach her, or if he'd given up, lulled into trust by all the years they'd spent together. The thought made my stomach twist. Amber stared out at the street, her fingers drumming on the table. Do you think people can get better? She asked. Or is it always just damage control? Fixing one disaster before the next one hits? I wanted to give her hope, but I was scared to lie. I think people can change, I said, carefully, but it's not magic. It's slow. Sometimes it's just learning how to live with your own chaos. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I realized then how alone she must feel, trapped inside a story she can't rewrite, holding on to the scraps of comfort she can find, even when they only leave her emptier than before. We left the cafe when the rain slowed to a drizzle, the city washed clean but somehow darker, lonelier. Amber pulled her hood up, her steps quick and nervous, as if she was trying to outrun something only she could see. I walked her to her car, the silence between us prickling with things unsaid. Before she left, she hugged me tightly, pressing her forehead against mine for a second, her breath warm and shaky. Thanks for not hating me, she whispered. I watched her drive off, headlights carving out a narrow tunnel in the wet night, and I stood there for a long time, letting the rain soak into my clothes. I didn't feel clean, not really. More like I'd wandered into a story that didn't belong to me and now couldn't find my way back out. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I kept seeing flashes, Amber's haunted eyes, her trembling hands, the lonely glow of her phone in the darkness. And underneath it all, a question gnawed at me. If your friend is lost in their own mess, how far can you follow them before you get lost too? Days started blending together. I noticed little changes in myself, how I'd flinch when my phone buzzed late at night, how I'd catch myself replaying every conversation with Amber, searching for patterns, missed warnings. Even the sound of her laugh on a voice message could send my heart into a slow, uncomfortable spin. I wondered if I was carrying her secrets like splinters under my skin, invisible but impossible to forget. One afternoon, I was home early, rain drumming against the window, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on my desk. Amber called. Her voice sounded flat, barely there. Can you come over? She asked, not really asking. I pulled on a sweatshirt, grabbed my keys, and tried to shake off the sense of inevitability creeping over me. Amber's apartment was dim, curtains drawn. She was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by childhood photos, old birthday cards, and receipts faded to nothing. She looked up, eyes red but dry. I was cleaning out my closet, she said, gesturing at the mess around her. I found all this. Thought it might make me feel something. I knelt beside her, picking up a photo, a much younger Amber, maybe 6 years old, grinning beside a man whose face was half cut out of the frame. I recognized the shape of her smile, how it strained to be wide enough for two. She talked, quietly at first, but soon her words poured out, raw and jagged. She told me about her childhood, how her mother seemed half present, how Amber grew up learning that silence was safer than questions. "I don't really remember my dad," she said, voice barely a whisper. "Just the feeling that he was supposed to be there, but wasn't. Like a chair at the table nobody ever sits in." I listened. It was all I could do. The room was heavy with old air, as if the memories themselves took up space. A clock ticked somewhere in the kitchen, each second a reminder that time kept moving forward, even if we felt stuck. She kept going. "I think I look for pieces of him in every guy I meet," she said. "Some stupid hope that someone will finally see me and stay." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "But they never do. Or I don't let them. I mess it up first, just to, I don't know, prove I was right all along." Her words hit something inside me, a knot of sadness and recognition, the way you feel standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you could fall, knowing you could jump. I told her about my own family, how love always felt a little conditional, how I'd learned to read the weather in someone's voice before they'd even finished a sentence. It was the most honest we'd been with each other in months. Maybe ever. Amber laughed softly, tears finally spilling over. "We're a mess," she said. "Do you think anyone else is this broken?" I shrugged, pulling her into a sideways hug. "Probably. But not everyone is brave enough to admit it." We spent the rest of the evening picking through the pile, sharing stories, good and bad, tracing our scars like constellations. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, as if the sky was trying to wash the whole city clean. Later, as I walked home in the damp darkness, I realized I felt lighter, but also more tangled. I couldn't decide if I was helping Amber, or just keeping her afloat long enough for the next storm to hit. And the anxiety never really left, just shifted, quieted for a while, waiting for whatever would come next. I didn't hear from Amber for almost a week after that. No calls, no texts, not even a random meme or a voice note about her day. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a good sign, maybe she needed time to process, to regroup, to be alone with her thoughts. But as the days passed, that empty space in my phone felt heavier, pressing against my own sense of normalcy, a low ache that pulsed every time I glanced at the screen. One evening, just after sunset, my phone finally buzzed. "Amber." The message was short. "Can you meet? Need to get out. Don't want to be alone, asterisk asterisk." She sent an address, a park across town I barely knew. I threw on a jacket and left without thinking, boots crunching on the gravel as I cut through the city. The air was cool, the sky bruised with leftover storm clouds, and by the time I reached the park the lamps had flickered on, pooling yellow light across wet benches and empty swings. Amber was sitting alone on the swings, her knees pulled up, hoodie bunched around her face. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the week had hollowed her out. I sat on the next swing, letting the silence stretch between us. For a while, the only sound was the slow squeak of chains in the night air. Finally, she spoke, her voice rough, words tumbling out in fits and starts. "I tried to tell him," she said quietly. "I wanted to. I kept rehearsing it in my head. Every time I opened my mouth, the words just died. He was looking at me like I was his whole world, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't break him like that." She pressed her hands against her eyes, shaking her head. "I thought maybe if I stopped. If I just cut myself off from everything, my phone, my friends, you, maybe it would go away. But it didn't. It got louder. I felt like I was disappearing, bit by bit, into something I couldn't stop." A dog barked in the distance. The sound seemed too bright, too alive for the gloom around us. Amber turned to me. Her eyes glittered in the streetlight. "Do you think I'm a terrible person?" I wanted to say no, to reassure her, but the words caught in my throat. All I could offer was honesty. "I think you're hurting. And you don't know how to stop hurting anyone else, either. But that doesn't make you evil. It just makes you lost." She looked away, breathing deep, her grip tight on the swing's chains. "I keep thinking about when I was a kid, you know? There was this old oak tree behind my house. I used to climb up there, sit on this crooked branch, and just watch everything. Sometimes I'd wish I could turn invisible. Sometimes I'd wish someone would come looking for me. She was silent for a long time, her hair hiding her face. Then she whispered, "Nobody ever came." I wanted to reach out, to hold her, but I stayed still, letting her have the space to say what she needed. Sometimes I think I do all this just to see if anyone will notice. If anyone will care enough to stop me. Stupid, right? I shook my head, blinking away the sting in my eyes. Not stupid. Just human. We sat there as the park emptied out, two shadows among the playground ghosts. I thought about all the times I'd watched Amber from across a crowded room, the way she'd smile for everyone, the way she'd make a joke out of her own sadness. It felt like I was finally seeing her, stripped bare of all the armor, all the practice performances. Eventually, Amber stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't look away. "Thanks for coming," she said, voice small but clear. "I don't know if it helps. But it's something." We left the park together, walking slow, letting the night press in around us. The world felt strange, unsteady, uncertain, but for that moment, neither of us was invisible. Neither of us was entirely alone. The city at night was always a different world, quieter, yes, but also more exposed, as if secrets hung from every street lamp. As we walked, I caught glimpses of Amber in the shifting light, the shadow under her eyes, the restless way her hands fidgeted with the cuff of her sleeve. She was trying to hold herself together, I could see that, but every so often she'd shudder, as if some chill had slipped inside and taken root. We ended up at an all-night convenience store, the kind with humming fridges and the bright, fake cheer of fluorescent lights. Amber insisted on buying instant noodles and a pack of gum. "Emergency comfort food," she said, managing a half-smile, and for a minute I let myself believe things could be normal. We sat on the curb outside, passing the steaming cup back and forth, the steam swirling in the cool air. There was something about the absurdity of eating noodles on the curb at midnight that loosened us both. Amber started telling me stories about her job, funny customers, bar disasters, the time she spilled a whole tray of drinks and tried to laugh it off. Her laughter came easier now, the kind that bubbles up when you're too tired to care about appearances. But every now and then, she'd pause. Her face would go still, her gaze drifting away, and I'd see the weight settling back on her shoulders. It was as if the joy had to sneak in during moments when the sadness wasn't looking. I tried to steer the conversation toward hope, maybe therapy, maybe talking to her boyfriend, maybe just making small changes. Amber listened, picking at the styrofoam cup, not promising anything. "I don't know what I want," she said finally. "Sometimes I think I want to burn it all down, just to see if I can start over. But then I remember how tired I am. And how scared." There was a long silence between us. The air was full of small city noises, a bus braking, someone's laughter echoing down the block, a distant siren. I thought about how many people in this city were probably having the same conversation, searching for a way out of the maze they'd built for themselves. When we finished the noodles, Amber stood, dusting off her jeans. "Will you walk me home?" she asked, voice soft. I nodded. We walked through puddles, our reflections stretched and broken beneath the streetlights. It felt like we were two people caught between worlds, childhood and adulthood, guilt and forgiveness, running away and finally stopping. Outside her building, she hesitated. For a second, I thought she'd invite me in, ask for one more hour of borrowed company, but instead she just squeezed my hand. "Thanks for showing up," she said. "Even when I make it impossible." I watched her disappear into the doorway, feeling that strange ache again, a mix of worry, affection, and helplessness. It occurred to me that maybe this was the real shape of friendship, not fixing, not saving, just refusing to turn away, even when things got messy. The walk home was quiet. The city seemed softer, the darkness less threatening somehow. But when I closed my door behind me, my own apartment felt unfamiliar, as if I'd crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. I lay in bed for a long time, sleep distant, replaying the night in my mind. I wondered if Amber was okay, if she'd sleep at all, if her boyfriend would notice the sadness in her eyes or just keep believing in the version of her he loved. There was no neat ending, no clarity or peace. Only the sense that some nights change you, and you won't realize how much until you wake up the next morning and feel everything is just slightly, quietly, out of place. The next morning, everything was wrapped in that strange hush that follows a sleepless night. I moved through my apartment almost on tiptoe, afraid that any sudden sound might shatter the uneasy peace that had settled over me. Even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wary, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, mouth set in a worried line I couldn't quite relax. I kept checking my phone for messages from Amber, half hoping she'd text something simple, light, maybe a joke about instant noodles or a selfie with bedhead and a goofy face. But the screen stayed stubbornly silent. I tried to remind myself this was normal, that she probably needed time, but anxiety gnawed at my stomach all the same. At work, everything felt sharper. I watched people moving in and out of rooms, heard fragments of laughter and arguments from down the hall, and it all felt so thin, like tissue paper stretched over something darker. I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about Amber, about all the secrets she carried, about the way her words from last night seemed to echo long after we'd parted. When I finally got a break, I slipped outside and called her. The phone rang, once, twice. I was ready for voicemail, already crafting the message in my head, but she answered, her voice small and scratchy. Hey. We talked quietly, neither of us saying much that mattered, but the simple fact of her voice was enough. She told me she was okay, just tired, taking the day off work to get her head right. I told her I was there, that she could call any time. She thanked me and hung up. The rest of the day passed in a kind of haze. That evening, I walked home through the city, letting the noise and movement wash over me, as if some of the world's energy might fill the emptiness inside. I kept seeing versions of Amber everywhere, a girl on a bus, alone and chewing her sleeve, a woman at a crosswalk, eyes fixed on her phone, jaw tight with something unspoken. It was like I'd suddenly tuned into a frequency of sadness I'd never noticed before. Later that week, Amber invited me over. I brought takeout and we ate sitting on her living room floor, legs stretched out, plastic containers spread between us. The apartment looked more lived in, less like a holding pen for someone on the edge. She'd done laundry, stacked some books, even put up a new poster. I felt a flicker of hope at these small signs of effort. We watched a movie. Halfway through, Amber paused it, her face illuminated by the TV's blue glow. I'm going to tell him, she said abruptly. I have to. I can't keep pretending. I feel like I'm rotting from the inside out. I didn't try to talk her out of it. Maybe, for once, I knew she meant it. She looked at me, and in her eyes was something both terrified and oddly calm. I know I'll lose him, she whispered, voice shaking, but I already lost myself a long time ago. The words hung in the air. I could almost hear the weight of them landing, like heavy stones in a pond. I'll be here, I said, barely trusting my own voice. She nodded, a sad smile flickering at her lips. I know. You always are. We finished the movie without another word about it, letting the noise of the TV cover our quiet fears. Afterward, we cleaned up in silence, both of us careful not to break the fragile peace we'd built for the night. When I left, Amber hugged me at the door, holding on just a little longer than usual. Her hair smelled like shampoo and hope. I walked home with a new ache in my chest, the city's lights blurring as rain started to fall, gentle and endless. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how much had changed. Not just for Amber, but for me too. There are moments when you see someone's broken edges so clearly that you can't help but recognize your own, and something about that shared vulnerability is both terrifying and profoundly human. It's what binds us together in the darkest hours, even when we have no idea what comes next. A few days later, Amber called me out of the blue, her voice trembling with that mix of resolve and dread that always comes just before something big. I told him, she said. The words hung there, stark and raw, and for a moment I could only listen to the silence stretching between us, heavy, trembling, almost sacred in its uncertainty. She told me the story in fragments. She'd waited until they were both home, the apartment closed in with the quiet hum of evening. She'd sat across from him at their little kitchen table, hands shaking as she tried to force the words out. Her boyfriend, his name was Liam, had just stared at her, confused at first, then slowly unraveling as her confessions spilled out, halting and uneven. Amber's voice broke as she described it. He didn't shout, he didn't throw anything. He just sat there. I could see it all happening in his eyes. Like watching someone go underwater and not come up. She started crying then, not the frantic sobs of guilt, but something deeper and more exhausted. I kept thinking, this is it. This is when everything I've been running from finally catches up to me. And it just did. I didn't know what to say. I told her the only true thing I could: I'm proud of you for telling the truth. I know how hard that was. She went quiet. He packed a bag. He said he needed to get away for a bit. He didn't say much else. Just that he still loved me, but he couldn't be here. There was another long pause, filled with the static of distant traffic and the ache of things you can't fix. I feel empty, she whispered. Like the floors dropped out from under me. But I also feel real, I guess. For the first time in forever, I'm not hiding. I wanted to be there for her in person, but Amber asked for space. She said she needed to figure out what came next on her own. The way she said it made it sound like a dare to herself. She promised to keep in touch, to let me know if she needed anything, and I promised not to hover. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark replaying every word, every pause. I thought about how honesty can feel like setting your life on fire, how relief and grief can bleed together until you can't tell one from the other. For days afterward, the world seemed strangely quiet, as if it was holding its breath alongside Amber. I threw myself into distractions: work, cleaning, the endless scroll of social media. I avoided the usual places where Amber and I would meet. I wondered how Liam was coping, what it was like for him to have his world upended by a truth he never saw coming. A week passed. Then, late one night, Amber texted. Can we meet? We chose a park halfway between our places, the sort of neutral ground that made it easier to talk. She looked pale, dark circles under her eyes, but there was a steadiness in the way she walked up to me. We sat on a bench, the air cool and fragrant with spring flowers and damp earth. She told me about the days since her confession, how she'd gone to work and come home, moving through the hours like someone learning to walk again. She hadn't heard much from Liam. Her mother had called, sensing something was wrong, but Amber hadn't told her the whole truth. I think I needed to sit in the mess for a while, she said. I spent so long running from it, covering it up, pretending. Now it's just here. And weirdly, it's not as unbearable as I thought. She looked at me, eyes clear for the first time in months. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I don't know if I'll ever stop messing up. But I want to try. For myself, this time. Not for anyone else. I squeezed her hand, feeling my own hope flicker to life. That's all you can do, I told her. Try, and keep trying. Even when it's ugly. We sat there a long time, listening to the world slowly turn, distant sirens, the shuffle of leaves, the quiet breathing of a city that holds so many secrets. For the first time, the silence between us felt like comfort, not dread. And somewhere in all that stillness, I realized something simple and shattering. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen, broken pieces and all. Sometimes, that's the only way you start to heal.